It was cool to see, like, understanding like which foods or which combinations of foods, how do you optimize diet around that to maintain your sort of metabolic health. And you might feel like, okay, this food by itself, maybe like a bowl of white rice maybe is not a good thing for me. But if I take a tablespoon of coconut oil and I add it to it, it somehow buffers the glucose response. And so, or you add fiber to something. And so you kind of learn like which things for you.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow. Welcome back to the Undercurrent podcast. I am joined today by Bob Troia, known in many circles as Quantified Bob. So thank you so much, Bob, for being here.
Great to be here, Garrett.
Bob and I have been friends for probably 7 or 8 years now. So it's been fun to see you, develop this as kind of a side. I mean, you're known as Quantified Bob, but you also have a day job. Can you just, before we get into the Quantified Bob, can you just tell everyone about yourself, kind of professional in your history so we can learn a little bit more about you?
Sure. So my background is in technology. I've been working with software, a lot of stuff that was web-based, now web, mobile, et cetera, for basically 2 decades. I started my career in the early days of the web. We're doing things like building websites, et cetera. And then I built a few companies over the years that were more in the digital marketing space, but using technology with marketing. And so worked with pretty much the biggest brands and companies out there. I sold the business back in maybe like 7 years ago. And at that point, I was like, well, what am I going to work on next? I kind of was always into this concept of self-optimization, understanding myself better through data. This is something I was doing years ago, mainly as an athlete from high school into college. Just, we didn't have all the tools we had today. So I was trying to kind of figure it out, like going to the library, getting books, understanding nutrition, understanding like what tools I could use to measure and get information on myself to optimize performance, mainly because I was and it was something that over the years I just always was doing. And at that moment, about 7 years ago, we kind of hit this inflection point where this concept of quantified self was coming into the mainstream, where there were people who were kind of self-aggregating as a community around the idea of self-knowledge through data. And they were using everything from pen and paper and notepads to new hardware and software that was coming out. I mean, at that time, we were just getting the first generation of consumer grade, like wearables, whether you're tracking sleep, activity, et cetera. There's a lot of things like lab testing that would have been prohibitively expensive, like something like looking at your DNA was like $1 million 10 years ago. Now, it's under $100 to do something like that. And I was basically just really always this curious person. And so I would look at this data and try to figure out like, okay, it wasn't like necessarily I was trying to solve something initially. It might have been like, I want to understand what makes myself tick and what knobs can I turn to. Maybe like, let's say I felt like an 8 in one area. How do you go from an 8 to a 10 to a 9, et cetera? And it was really right before I was selling my business that I hit a moment where I was being successful, running a business. I was a musician playing in a band. I was an athlete, like still playing sports. Everything on the outside looked great. I thought I was eating right, exercising every day, but I was inside, I was exhausted. I was drained. I remember one day just like curling up on the couch. I was like, I'm just burnt out, man. I don't know what's going on. I felt like I was doing everything right. And that really made me start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, and look in my, like through lab testing and other things and rethinking diet, and nutrition, the way and exercise, just seeing like the things that I thought what I was doing right, maybe were not the best. And so I had to kind of push away the ego, push away this other stuff and say, I have a belief system around these areas that, because that's what I was taught or through the information I had access to that was felt. I had to basically say to myself, have these strong beliefs, but loosely held. It's like a saying out there, and be willing to challenge your like beliefs about that stuff. And so if new information becomes available that challenges it, don't just push it to the side to say, okay, let me see, I'll look at this. And part of me was always into self-experimentation. So like setting up single subject experiments, so to speak, where you would try something out, you maybe have a baseline and you add it, you see, is there a positive or negative or no result? And be like, is this something I should adapt into my lifestyle, at a longer scale? And so it's, the whole idea of that with software, my background in technology was always, I could build things, if I needed to dig into databases or software or hack a wearable that maybe wasn't giving me my data, I could do it. So I was getting all that. And so, now today, I'm still working now where you talk about this concept of marrying your passion and your purpose. I feel like what I'm doing now is, I'm not working in the marketing space anymore, not doing that sort of thing. I'm still in technology because I love technology. I love being creative. I love building things, but I also am passionate about this concept of personal optimization. So I'm a co-founder of a company called Awesome Labs, and we've been building tools that are really making health and wellness accessible to, like, I might take things to the extreme. So how do we figure out to make it accessible to people that aren't going to, they're not going to put in that much effort, but they want to get a lot of insights and value out of understanding themselves better, and finding ways to make, what are the simple changes you can make that, can make the biggest impact. And so, yeah, and that's where I am today. And, and I know we've met, I think, the early days of the sort of biohacking community, so to speak. We've known each other now for what you said, 7-8 years.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I love how you've been able to, evolve certainly in your understanding here, and as we'll dive into this, and now be able to have a new business venture that's, like you said, marrying your purpose and passion, that takes all this work that you've been doing over the last several years in the self-quantification and biohacking space. And people can imagine we've done some work together over the years. Before we get into that, can you just talk about some of your other, non-Neubie related, kind of more interesting self-experiments and insights that you've had, and some of the other tools that you've used? Just kind of what stands out as being the most like interesting or insightful self-experiments?
Sure. Yeah. So just to take things one step back again, so basically this is still about 7-8 years ago, I was at one of these Quantified Self conferences. So this community, actually, there were people from around the world that were sharing their self experiments and insights and ways to construct these experiments, et cetera. And I was pretty inspired. And this is how it all really, this whole Quantified Bob thing came about, was really, I wanted to start documenting my own experiences. I was like, mainly because I wanted to get it down on what's called paper, or on typing out or whatever. Just I wanted to make sure I was documenting what I was doing. And the blog was really originally just for me, and I needed just a name for this, I guess, blog website. And Quantified Bob was just like something that popped into my head. I was in a hotel room, I remember, at the conference, and I was like, I registered it, and then that was kind of it. So there wasn't like any real big thought process there. And so what was interesting was over the years, as I would be sharing or documenting some of my personal experiments, I was finding that other people were seeking out the same information. And it was cool to see like how maybe inspired people to try to replicate things I did. And that kind of proves the point that we're all individuals. And so your results will always be different than mine. We're just, so we can construct the same experiment. And that's where this idea of single subject experimentation is important, because you often see studies where they're trying to group everyone together and see, is there a common result? And what we're seeing is, because we're all individuals under the same set of circumstances, there might be some overlap there, but we all have these individual circumstances, and doesn't mean anybody's right or wrong. We're just different. And so with that, you talk about what are some of the modalities and tools. A lot of people get attached now to, like, they get the shiny object syndrome, like technologies or a new device comes out. I'm wearing several activity trackers now, and I've got other ones on the charger, just because, and I'm doing it more from not that everybody needs to wear 4 different fitness trackers. But I do things like I'm comparing data across these devices. I'm trying to figure out where's their commonality, where do things maybe, doesn't mean one's correct or incorrect or more correct. It just means, do they correlate with each other? As long as, if one's saying, they both say you got 8 hours of sleep last night, but one's saying you got this much REM sleep or, dream state sleep, and the other one says you've got much less, and that's pretty consistent. That's just something with the device or the algorithms, or potentially even user error, like maybe I don't have it on tight enough or something like that. I've experimented with different modalities from, everything from things to, from a measurement standpoint that can measure the body, measure the environment, measure, quantify exercise, sleep, stress, those types of things, to the other side of which is more, it's less data, it's more just like devices or modalities that can help you with things, whether it's recovery. We've all probably done things with cold exposure or saunas, or everything from like pulse electromagnetic field therapy to I've got some more woo stuff where you're doing things with frequencies that are like like some devices like biocharger, which you're sitting in a field where it's pulsing you with certain frequencies, and there's just a lot of things out there, and we could talk about any of those. I see you have a red light panel behind you, so doing understanding these LED lights exactly, which understanding like what are the effects of red versus near infrared, and that what are the at different ranges, what are those doing to the body at different, and what do you want them to do to the body based on your goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're learning so much, and I think this knowledge, a lot of this stuff's been around for a long time. Like I was buying light panels 8 years ago, but they were like plant grow lights from China, the AliExpress, and I'd be like, hey, can you make me one with 660 nanometer red? And they'd ship it from China for like $50. It's like not that big of a like not a panel like you have, it's like a small thing like that, and I could I realized like I could use that for some exposure. I'd read about the benefits of red light therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we can talk about any of these modalities like for hours on end, each one.
If you're ready to supercharge your practice, listen to this. Garrett and Team NeuFit have just released a new online course entitled Introduction to the NeuFit Method. In this detailed 8-hour course, you'll gain mastery of the fundamental techniques in our practice, including muscle testing and activations, nerve glides, and joint articulations. You'll also get introduced to our patented direct current stimulation device, the Neubie, an incredible machine that's empowered professionals just like you to help their patients heal, adapt, and grow faster than they ever thought possible. To learn more, go to www.neu.fit/learn. And now back to the show.
And so among all of those, and I think that's a kind of a nice tour of a lot of the most impactful and interesting biohacking tools and different, there's a lot in this energy space, in light, I can't remember if you mentioned PEMF there, or that was before in our conversation before we started recording, but all these different modalities that you've been using. And among all the self experiments that you've done, I'm curious what for you, and again with the caveat that everyone is different and will respond differently based on their unique sets of circumstances, but for you in terms of these experiments, what have been the most significant observations, or what has moved the needle the most, positively or negatively? And sometimes neutral or no result is also a good finding too. I'm just kind of thinking, for trying to cherry pick for what's the most interesting here for everyone to hear. What are some of those most significant findings that you've had with the different testing? I know you've measured sleep, you've measured blood work, you've measured continuous glucose, you've done a lot of different self-quantification, you measured seasonal variations in different things. Between the testing method and what data you've measured and different interventions you've tried, what have been the combinations that have kind of moved the needle the most in your own experience?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there are oftentimes you're getting insights that are like they're cool. Like I learned something about myself, but does that mean it's anything I have to apply, or it's just you just learn something about yourself versus something that you're like, this is going to have a pretty profound effect if I continue this, or if I control these set of circumstances. So one, for example, sleep, right? Everyone I know is trying to sleep better. And you can look at, people are tracking their sleep. So let's say you have some data, like you can look every morning and look at your sleep data, or you can look at it over the weeks or the months, et cetera. But what affects your sleep? So let's assume we spend a third of our lives sleeping. So that's a pretty important thing to optimize. That's a third of our lives, but it also has, those benefits carry beyond, because if you wake up tired, the rest of your day is kind of shot. And so I started looking at, okay, how do I optimize my environment? So for sleep, so let's take bedroom. And so I was controlling for, okay, put up blackout curtains, darken that room, make it cold. Both the air is cold. I'm using a thing on my bed called a ChiliPad that pumps cold water through it that I can dial the temperature in. So like I'm sleeping in like a super cold room on top of this cold mat, and adding. So I started layering all these other like interventions on. So and just to see what actually had the most profound effects. And so things like controlling obviously light and sound, and the temperature. I also realized, looking at my sleep data, that I was waking up a lot during the night. I wouldn't wake up remembering that I woke up. It was like little, you could see little dots on your sleep data. And it turns out that like I was probably waking up because I was probably like mouth open like that, and probably stop breathing. Not a full apnea, but enough to wake you up. Are you awake?
Mm-hmm.
So I started mouth taping. It's a technique. You just take this like cheap nanopore 3M tape, you put a little piece on your mouth, and it makes you breathe through your nose all night. And that had a pretty profound effect on sleep, heart rate variability, things like that, because I think just it was getting rid of those disruptions, but it had also other benefits, that because I was breathing through my nose all night, I wouldn't wake up with my nose at all clogged. It just seemed to, it was just a great bang for the buck there. I also, with my bed, there's a technique called Incline Bed Therapy. So you take the headboard side of your bed and you elevate it around 6 inches. So I have these little blocks. So I'm actually sleeping at a slight, so my head's up here, feet are down below. It's just it's a subtle beat, so if you're talking 6 inches over the length of a bed, it's not that steep, but but that forces your body with circulation, lymphatic drainage, things like that. It seems to have a pretty good effect. Like I've noticed when I've done it versus not used it, I always seem to have slightly better sleep with that.
And that's an interesting one. Isn't it true that a lot of animals will like sleep with their head uphill? Like there's almost some sort of natural instinct to do that. And then and also that at least some hypothesis that can help cleanse the brain, so we get less of those plaques building up that lead to dementia and things over time, and that can help like clean out, really like help the detoxification of the brain, right? That's kind of an interesting frontier.
Yeah, there's a lot of, some things that have been proven, some things are still theoretical, but yeah, you're definitely going to have some, just being on that incline, if it's slight, it's going to provide some additional, like gravity is going to help with any kind of drainage, whether, what they call that, the lymphatic system, I think is the
yeah, that's right.
So yeah, I think, from that standpoint, if you're, from a sleep perspective, if part of sleep is flushing out these toxins and things from the body, I guess it would have a benefit there. Now, I can only quantify it from the standpoint of, is sleep improving or not? I can't, look at it from the other, that's a harder thing to sort of find. But, you could also look at things like heart rate variability, which is another nice metric you should always be tracking and related to sleep.
So with just before we move on from this, so with the ChiliPad, with the mouth taping, with increasing the height of, raising the headboard side of your bed 6 inches, how did these impact your sleep, like in terms of the data you were seeing? What were some of the effects?
Well, the ChiliPad, let's just say the general concept of a cold bedroom, like the colder the better. Like, you can be it could be like I've done things in the winter where I just literally turn the heat off, let my room get super, super cold. I'm under the blanket, so it's like I'm not super cold. It's the air is cold. And the ChiliPad in the summertime for a lot of people, because they you do get hot, but in the winter too, it's good to have it a bit chilly. The main things I noticed were increasing like sleep quality, especially deep sleep. So if you think about the way we sleep, when we fall asleep and we do the first half of our overnight is pretty much deep sleep. That's what we want. And our REM comes later and more frequent up until we wake up. So your body's cooling down. And so by cool, however you want to cool yourself down, you're helping your body get to that state. What ends up happening there is your heart rate slows down. So I've noticed like my resting heart rate has gotten lower and lower, like dropped. You know, I already have a pretty low resting heart rate, but I was like amazed at how I could drop it down. Like I could drop it below 40 beats a minute sometimes. And you know, and so the problem with, so then that cooling it down, and then your body gradually starts warming back up as you approach you know, morning. And so that's where and that will trigger more REM. So what I've been doing is manipulating the temperature overnight so that the midway point, I would want to cool down to a certain point, and then I'd have the chili pad basically shut it off, and my body would start naturally warming back up, and that would bring me back up. So by the time in the morning when I'm supposed to wake up, you know, I should have my cycles of REM going through there. And but if you kept it cold all night, you may actually not get to REM stage as much. Your body's still in that deep, which may be something someone needs periodically. But I think you typically want to have that kind of beginning of the overnight be that deep, and then work your way into the full stages of deep to REM.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome how the data helped you figure out that you know, being too cold for too long might be a problem, but switching it and like kind of switching it in the middle of the night was kind of the strategy that the data led you to that you might not otherwise have figured out, right?
Yeah, and you know, and to sort of like going, not a tangent, but a related topic. So another area would be continuous, like glucose monitoring, looking at the blood sugar. I started experimenting with this probably, you know, 7-8 years ago, where I just went and bought a regular glucose meter, you know, $30, and you basically prick your finger, drop the blood onto a test strip on the meter, and it says, you know, this is your blood sugar level, your blood glucose. And I was learning about like the effects of just like exercise and travel and certain, you know, things around food, and but it gave me a lot of insight. But you know, you have to prick your finger every time you want to get this. And a few years back, there have always been continuous glucose monitors that like some like type 1 diabetics would use, and because it's like life or death, they need like insulin, et cetera. But then they came out with these continuous glucose monitors now that they shrunk down to the size of basically like a $50 that go around to the back of your arm, and it samples interstitial fluid. So it's not like a needle that's into the bloodstream, it's just under the skin. And it's collecting data nonstop. And so, for example, I could never see what was happening while I was sleeping because I couldn't prick my finger while I was sleeping. Or if you wanted to have a higher level of detail in your, like, you know, instead of, let's say you took 1 or 2 readings a day, or even 3, now you're getting them every, you know, 10, 15 minutes, and you have all the data points. So you can do some cool things like just eating different foods and seeing which foods, you know, are really your kind of danger foods in terms of like stability of, you know, you don't want your glucose spiking high all the time and staying there at an elevated level for a long period of time. You know, there's times where like, yeah, you'll eat something, you'll spike. You may want that maybe after a workout. And so it was cool to see, like, you know, understanding like which foods or which combinations of foods, you know, how do you optimize diet around that to maintain your sort of metabolic health. And, you know, you might feel like, okay, this food by itself, maybe like a bowl of white rice maybe is not a good thing for me. But if I take a tablespoon of coconut oil and I add it to it, it somehow buffers the glucose response. And so, or you add fiber to something. And so you kind of learn like which things for you. And now there's a bunch of companies coming out now. They're basically building software on top of this. They're basically taking these meters and they're building cool interfaces to like basically let you do the meal tracking, look at what's happening to you. And then, you know, even if you eat the same thing repeatedly, like make sure like did the graph the same each time. Another thing about sleep is back to like waking up overnight. Another thing that the theory was that I actually had I would go hypoglycemic sometimes overnight. So I actually had really low dips. So your body's gonna cortisol, wake up, you know, get your blood sugar back up. So I saw that in my data. And what that told me was just how I timed my meals throughout the day. Cause I often intermittent fast. I'll eat most of my meals, let's say between 12 p.m., let's say to 8 p.m. So maybe for me, it meant like I maybe had to add some complex carbohydrates to my final meal of the day, just so I had something so my blood sugar would not just tank, like have that dip at like 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning, keeps it at an okay level. Other people have, maybe other circumstances. So it's good just to see that information. It's not like you have to worry. For folks like us, if you're not a diabetic or, you're generally healthy people, but we're using this information, we're using these tools to give us really cool insights about ourselves. You can take that, whether it's for diet, sleep, exercise, general stress. Like I know people that were wearing these continuous glucose monitors around when like all the COVID stuff was going down, and their glucose was spiking. And it doesn't mean like, so because they were so stressed, and cortisol spikes up your glucose. And so like they can actually see beyond just looking at blood pressure and stuff like that. You'll actually see like your blood sugar you're just you're in that sympathetic fight or flight like all the time. And so it kind of gives you those other types of observations.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. And that's so cool to be able to see how these interventions can actually impact your data. They can change your, something like adding coconut oil to your white rice can change your blood sugar response. And it's one thing to read about it, but it's another thing to like see it in your own. I just find that so cool and so inspiring when you can actually see the changes there. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
And you can layer it, you can go the opposite direction. Like if anyone's ever done any like fasting, it's like I recently did like a 5-day water fast. And so you may want to record, you can track your glucose and ketones during the whole, like most people are fasting, they want to see how high they can get their ketones, right? They want to see their body shift fuel sources. They want to be like, I'm using fat for fuel now. And some people can take, 4 days, or some people might do it in 2.5 days. You'll see that shift where the curve, the actual, like if you compare glucose and ketones, they invert. And that means your body's primarily being fueled by, ketones at that point. But you could see like, from fast, you can layer that in with other things. Like I did one of my fasts, I did a bunch of blood work before and after. So I wanted to see the effects. Because one of the things the benefits for me are, I don't fast. If I fast, it's not for weight loss. It's not for anything like that. It's actually for like a metabolic reset. It's giving my system just time to like, don't just take all load off it in terms of like what I'm putting into it, let it just reset. And then there's this, one of the coolest things about fasting is really just when you refeed at the end of a fast, your body goes, okay, I'm not going to die. I'm getting food now. And you release all these growth factors. So I was looking at lab work, like testosterone levels before the fast and after. And I just saw this like surge, like all that stuff spiked up because the body was like, yeah, we can release, all these growth factors can be released now. And so that for me proved something like I work into my annual routine. So I might do like a shorter, like a water fast, like 3 days every few months. And then once or twice a year, I'll do a longer fast, like the 5-day or longer, which, so I've got different layers of fat. I've got daily intermittent fasting. Let's call that maybe like 5 days a week, quarterly, like a 3-day water fast, and then a longer one a few times a year. And, and I just know like kind of get those types of resets are just helpful for me, and I think it might be something where like I've seen other people who are like, they're fasting like all the time, and maybe for them it works, but there might be a diminishing return, or actually could start hurting at some point. So it's, you have to understand your own circumstances around that. Like what's the sweet spot if you're going to do any of those types of things.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome to be able to really quantify that and see it in action and see the response and the growth factors out to kind of rebound afterwards. That's awesome. Awesome to be able to quantify that. Thank you for sharing that. We could probably do a whole other episode on fasting and all the physiology and what happens there. I want to give you a chance to share real quick, just to switch gears to some of the work that we've done together. I know we've talked and you've shared the experience of how this technology was able to help you recover faster from an ankle sprain and things like that. And that's pretty cool. But there was another thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting that we don't really talk about very much in terms of your response to the Neubie. Do you remember that when you were telling me kind of, some of the highlights of your experiences with it, and you were talking about skill acquisition and stuff? Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and that perspective? I think that's so interesting.
Sure. Yeah, I know like, a lot of people think of this technology from a rehabilitation standpoint, right? But I think there's performance, from the performance side, something that I had experienced was this, I think just being more neurologically sound and working out disconnects, or just being, I don't know, just in a prime state, I guess, for lack of a better word. Things like skill acquisition, meaning when I've been faced with a new like activity. So it could be like I was going to juggle for the first time. I never really could juggle. And one day I was like, hey, I got these little juggling balls, and it's like, let me try to do it. And I stunk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, but then it was like it clicked. It was like boom. It just sort of like, I started doing it, and I was like, wow, that's pretty cool that I just like picked it up that fast. Or the first time, like say I go surfing, or I actually went last weekend. I went what's it called?
The inland
wake surfing. I had never done it in my life, and they explained to me, first 2 times I got up a little bit, I fell right down. 3rd time, I just started going, and and I granted, like I can equate some of that to maybe like doing other things like snowboarding, or but it's the whole idea of being faced with a new thing, whether it's surfing or juggling or some other sport. It's that when I say acquisition, it's almost like I think of these. You're seeing a lot of stuff with these robots now, where they're like, it's called unsupervised learning. Like they put a robot in front of a thing and says, put this box on top of this thing, and the first time it does it, it drops it. And goes, gotta hold it hot, gotta hold it tighter, and you watch this robot learn. Right? It's almost like that. You feel like you're doing that to yourself. You're like, I'm able to like kind of calibrate. First time I'm going to be terrible. Second time, maybe I overshot it. 3rd time, I'm like, boom. Then you lock in, and you've got the skill set that you can just pick up. So it's cool. Like whether and usually it's something around sports and athletics. I do think things like reaction time. I've seen I've done all sorts of cognitive testing around those types of things, and I'm like I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I've been like at the top. Like I've done this with neurofeedback, like just getting tested through like EEG stuff. Also, there's just tests you can do for like reaction time, speed tests, and that kind of thing. I'm pretty I feel like I'm pretty primed for that stuff now. Which is cool.
That's awesome. I remember when we were talking back that moment when you were learning juggling, and you just felt like you were that robot learning, like you acquired the skill faster and everything. That was really cool. So I appreciate you sharing that. If people are intrigued and they want to read your blog and they want to see more of what you're up to, what's the best place to look you up?
Cool. Yeah, you can just go to quantifiedbob.com. That's my website, or you can also follow me on social media like Twitter, Instagram. It's Quantified Bob. And you'll probably see more of the long form experiments and posts on my blog, whereas Instagram might be like more like, hey, here's what's kind of happening in real time, or sharing little other short tidbits of information. But yeah, feel free. Anyone can connect with me there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here, Bob. I love talking shop with you, and I love how you've been able to apply your technology knowledge, into this biohacking self-quantification space. And it's been just an honor getting to know you personally and professionally over the last several years. So, we want to keep working with you and keep those experiments going. We love watching it. It's really cool.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Garrett.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This is the Undercurrent Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date as we release future episodes.